Hello, my name is Jeff Rangenfeld, and these are the interview questions for exercise 5.7. Question number 1. What does the CRISP-DM methodology for data mining entail? What does the data analyst do in each step? The CRISP-DM methodology stands for Cross-Industry Standard Process for Data Mining. It's a widely used framework that guides the data mining process through 6 key phases: business understanding, data preparation, modeling, evaluation, and deployment. Business understanding, the first step, involves understanding the business goals and priorities so I can tailor the data mining project accordingly. In this initial step, my role is to collaborate with stakeholders to define the problem, set clear objectives, and identify KPIs for the task at hand. Step number 2, data understanding, is where I would collect, explore, and identify any quality issues with the data. My goal is to become familiar with the data and assess its relevance to the business problem. The third step, data preparation, is all about analysis, where I'll be cleaning and selecting the relevant data. This could include handling missing data, correcting inconsistencies, and creating additional fields or variables for the modeling. Next comes modeling, where I would apply various data mining techniques to build predictive or descriptive modeling, known as the prototype model. Model types could include classification, regression, or clustering, and documentation is crucial here, in case I would need to update or adjust the modeling, which is almost always necessary. Once my prototype model has been built, the evaluation step is next. As a data analyst, I'd interpret the results and make sure the model answers the business objective. Finally comes deployment, where the model is put into practice, but my work isn't finished yet. It is my job to monitor and document the model performance to make sure the findings are actionable and the stakeholders feel well informed to make their decisions. Question number 2, explain what needs to be done before you can forecast time series. In other words, what does time series analysis involve? The goal for a time series analysis is to find out why the data looks the way it does by identifying trends or patterns. There are 3 main components in a time series analysis: stationarity, autocorrelation, and seasonality. A time series analysis should, for the most part, try to be stationary. This means having these statistical attributes, such as the means and variance, stay the same over time. If the data is not stationary, I might apply transformations, such as differencing or logarithms, to stabilize the series. The reason for doing so is that it makes forecasting much easier to predict when stationary. Next comes the autocorrelation component. Essentially, it measures how the current values in the series relate to the past values. If a time series has strong autocorrelation, it means that past values have a significant influence on future values. Understanding the autocorrelation relationship is key to building an accurate time series model. The last component is seasonality. It is very important to see if the time series pattern exhibits a seasonality trend to allow for a more accurate forecasting. A great example in the retail industry would be the peak of sales during the Christmas holiday season. And staffing and stocking during this time, it is important to adequately staff and stock appropriately to ensure proper support and product during this peak time of year. To summarize, time series analysis involves data exploration to ensure stationarity, finding and understanding the autocorrelation, and addressing seasonality. This approach helps in creating an accurate model and reliable forecasts. Question 3. Discuss the main principles of data ethics, as well as what companies or organizations could do to uphold these principles. There are 4 principles in data ethics that should guide companies or organizations for their behavior and what's right and wrong. Privacy is first. Privacy is individuals, meaning individuals should be in control of their data. It is important for organizations to get the consent of an individual before they collect and share private information. An example of a company not adhering to the privacy principle was Google's Project Nightingale, where they failed to provide a means to have their customers give consent when sharing their health information to Ascension, which is an American healthcare provider. The next pillar of data ethics is transparency. Individuals should have a clear overview of the data that organizations collect and share, meaning organizations should be transparent about how they handle and process data, both internally and externally. Companies should be open with their employees and customers about their data collection and how it's being used. The transparency shown through this should, in theory, build trust with customers and their employees, with the benefits of customer retention as well as employee retention. Accountability is next. Organizations are responsible for the data that they collect and share, and should be safeguarding an individual's private information and ultimately be held accountable if that's not the case. A company should be implementing clear policies and procedures for data governance and ensure all employees and partners adhere to these standards. Finally comes equality. Organizations must not disadvantage or discriminate against individuals or groups when handling and processing data. Data that is worked by humans always has the risk of lending itself to human bias, which could lead to discriminatory practices. I think this is a very important thing to acknowledge and always be vigilant about when bias or potential discriminatory practices are coming into play. To mitigate bias, companies need to be vigilant about avoiding discriminatory practices, especially when it comes to hiring, lending money, or any decision making. To do this, regular audits of algorithms and data sets should be taking place on a regular basis. Question 4. Imagine you're an analyst at a financial services company and have some concerns about bias in the way a predictive model was measured. How would you raise your concerns with your manager and make some suggestions for how to avoid measurement bias in the future? I think I would first start by investigating to see if my concerns are valid. I think this is important here to show that I am noticing something, but I think I should also be doing my due diligence to make sure that my concerns are valid before reaching out to my manager. Once I have some data, some kind of points to bring up, I would then reach out to my manager in a professional way, whether it be in person, via email, and meet with them, and then address my concern. But I think it's very important here in this particular situation to be more inquisitory than accusative, as to not offend and have the mindset, and to not offend my manager or whomever may be working on this model. I also think it's important to have the mindset to gain more of an understanding of the current model in place versus pointing out its potential flaws. This would show my interest. It would also show my concern in a professional manner. Once my concerns have been discussed, along with reviewing the data, the points that I brought to the meeting, I think it's important to have potential solutions available as well. This shows that I am prepared, not only prepared for the discussion, but also bring additional material, additional solutions to it as well, without just other than raising a concern without additional thought behind it. There are certain ways to avoid measurement bias. The biggest one is just to have regular audits on the model in question to make sure its performance is adequate and the model hasn't skewed in any way since its launch. Important to note that when testing a model, to make sure all the testers have similar levels of training and years of experience. This was something that was lectured in CareerFoundry to ensure that all the testers be on the same plane so they can kind of notice the same mistakes and acknowledge the correctness of the model as well. Question 5. Explain the difference between regression and classification models in predictive analysis. When would you use one of these models over the other? Regression models are used to predict something based on an independent variable. Simply put, they show how one variable may affect another in order to make predictions. An example of this, scientists have been using regression for years now to measure the relationship between CO2 in the atmosphere and the rise in temperature to predict climate change. Another example is operational managers will use regression to predict how production demands will affect labor requirements. Classification models are when the target variable is categorical, meaning it belongs to one of several predefined classes or categories. An example of this is something we see every day. It is the spam filter on our email account. Every time we receive an email, it will go through this model and say, is this a primary email or is this a spam email, and put that into each respective box. Another example is predicting if a customer will return or buy from a retailer again. There are a lot of retailers that perform this model when it comes to their online marketing. Now, moving on to when you use which one. You would use a regression when the goal is to predict a continuous numeric value. So essentially, if you want to forecast some type of figure in the future. An example could be forecasting sales for the next quarter. You would use a regression model to estimate the specific or the estimated sales figure. Next, you would use classification when your goal is to categorize or label data. For example, referencing the CareerFoundry exercise, if you want to classify if transactions at a bank are fraudulent or non-fraudulent, a classification model would be appropriate here. This is the summary of my answers. Thank you for your time.